Mr. President, I'm very grateful to the Council and to the Office of the High Commissioner for the opportunity to discuss the urgent matter of how to prevent genocide and other mass atrocities in the uncertain world in which we're living. It is encouraging to see that the discussions and actions embarked upon in the mid-2000s, including the development of the responsibility to protect doctrine, are again present in the international community. The two decades that have passed have not seen a great improvement in our collective ability to prevent mass atrocities. In fact, the specter of genocide has continued to haunt us in some places, like Darfur in Sudan, with history seeming to repeat itself in ways no less tragic now than then. This should be an indication to all of us that, in addition to the urgency to respond to these enormous risks to our common humanity, we need to analyze the reasons why the initiatives embarked upon in the early and mid-2000s did not bear the fruits that we expected. One important lesson learned is to not to get stuck on the definition of genocide as a prelude to any international action. It is appropriate to concentrate on the risk that what are now crimes against humanity or war crimes or serious human rights violations can become genocide unless we act to prevent them. The definition of genocide includes a specific intent that is almost never made explicit, though it certainly can be gleaned from the actions on the ground. If we wait until all elements of the definition are in place, we have not prevented genocide from happening. 20 years ago and now, we discuss the need for early warning of situations that, if left unattended, can deteriorate into genocide as defined in the 1948 Convention. What constitutes early warning will always be debatable, but we know that it should precede that deterioration with enough time to deploy efforts, diplomatic, political, peacemaking, peacekeeping, and even military efforts designed to alter the course of events. That is why the early warning cannot be separated from the early action that is required to prevent genocide. In other words, it is not enough to issue alerts to the international community about a situation that is trending towards mass atrocities. The warning has to be accompanied with suggestions for what the international community can and must do to reverse that trend. Early warning requires a very fluid flow of information and access to that information in as real time as possible. It also requires in-depth analysis of the factors and circumstances that are pushing that particular situation in the direction of genocide. Examples and comparisons with other situations in other historical, geographic, or cultural settings will always be helpful, especially if those examples also yield some successful or partially successful experiments with prevention. However, it is important to recognize that genocidal crises are very idiosyncratic. It follows that what works in one set of circumstances may not be applicable in other situations. The information gathered in early warning must have a particular dynamic quality because the crisis itself will always be very dynamic. Factors that succeed in putting brakes on the deterioration may disappear very quickly, making it necessary to adjust the recommendations for international action to allow quick shifts and adaptation to changes on the ground. For the same reason that it is vital to have access to the information flow, including open sources, but also reports from the ground by responsible actors and observers in the field, it is also crucial to have as direct access as possible to the institutions and decision makers that are in a position to formulate policy and affect the reality on the ground. Access to the Security Council must necessarily come through the Office of the Secretary General. The Executive Office must have the political will to listen and convey rapidly the information to the Security Council. In turn, the Security Council must also have the political will to listen and consider the warnings and the recommendations for action that are made on the basis of the changing reality on the ground. The serious problems that we face in this area should not deter us from taking stock of some advances that the international community has achieved. The doctrine of responsibility to protect has been ratified by the General Assembly several times since its adoption in the World Summit of 2005, and the resistance to it remains confined to a stubborn minority of states. The UN can build upon the majority view that considers R2P worthy of support and continue to build from it the mechanisms that are designed to make it operational. In addition, the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice are also instruments that can turn judicial action into effective tools of prevention. Of course, a major roadblock will continue to be the lack of political will to act collectively to protect populations at risk. But it is also true that political will is constructed and developed in each case, mostly through the mobilization of public opinion that can be made with sound information and viable proposals for action. Experience shows that the early warning, early action required must proceed simultaneously on 4 fronts. The first one is protection. Once we identify a population that is at risk of mass atrocities, we must propose means to protect them from harm in various ways, including military deployment of a defensive nature if necessary. But it is worth noting that the will to intervene does not always require military presence. Civilian observers can sometimes very effectively provide protection by being there and reporting to the world. The second is humanitarian assistance, because populations at risk are already suffering from displacement and urgent need for food, medical care, and education for children. In addition, relief in today's world is dispensed in a way that places literally hundreds of volunteers among the vulnerable population, thus acting as an important measure of protection as well. The third area is accountability, and here I wish to agree with the Deputy High Commissioner and with Ms. Gamba on the importance of the accountability for serious crimes already committed against a group at risk. Impunity for those crimes only encourages new crimes. Also, the victimized population needs to exercise agency to defend their own rights, and this can only begin to happen in a scenario in which they see justice being done. And the fourth is peace negotiations, because the underlying conflict that threatens to result in genocide must be addressed and resolved without ostensible winners and losers. This negotiation must lead in stages to ceasefires first and then to armistice and demobilization and disarmament. It is important to adopt measures in each of these 4 areas simultaneously, even if at given times one or more of the areas take precedence in terms of effort and investment. Even more important is to be able to encourage action in each area that is meant to address the dynamic changes on the ground, including ways to address factors that are seen as accelerants of the risk of mass atrocities, as well as those that have potential to deter and retard the negative trends. My final point is the need to avoid a tendency we observed in the 2000s, the refusal to use the word genocide, even if we predicate it by insisting that we are only referring to the likelihood that a current crisis could become genocidal. We heard repeatedly that crisis X was insurgency or counterinsurgency or counterterrorism or a state of war. In each case, the label we used allows some of us to say, but it is not genocide. The obvious mistake was to assume that such conflicts, even if accurately described, could not also result in genocide. Maybe our collective reluctance was a way to avoid moral obligations. The effect was to engage in endless characterizations and differentiations while tragedies continued to unfold. I hope that this time around we will be more willing to use the word genocide when appropriate and as a call for action. Thank you.